Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Daily Easy English Talk. I'm Emma.
And I'm Jack. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're jumping into something that's been, well, all over the news lately. A really public and honestly kind of messy disagreement.
Yeah, between two very, very well-known people, Elon Musk and Donald Trump. You've probably heard something about it.
Absolutely. So our plan here, our mission for this deep dive is pretty straightforward. We're going to take the sources you sent over.
Mostly news articles, right? Recent ones detailing this whole situation.
Exactly. And we're going to carefully unpack them together, piece by piece.
Think of it like this. We're your guides through these articles. We'll dig deep, pull out the key facts, the important quotes, what the articles say actually happened.
The goal is to help you get a clear picture what was said, by who, and why the articles suggest this whole thing is, well, a big deal.
Yeah, trying to cut through the noise, Get to what your sources actually report.
Okay, let's unpack this then. So, according to these news articles you shared, this disagreement didn't just sort of slowly build up. It seems like it really exploded into public view pretty recently.
That's what the sources pinpoint. They give a specific date, actually.
Yeah.
Thursday, June 5th, 2025.
June 5th. Okay, so that's when it really kicked off publicly.
Seems like it. That's the date identified in the articles as the starting point for the public fireworks. And they tell us how it started getting attention that day.
Oh.
It began, the sources explain, when Elon Musk said something very critical, very negative, about a big plan President Trump was pushing.
A plan, like a law.
Yeah, a piece of legislation. The sources call it a few things, sometimes a budget bill, sometimes a tax break bill.
Okay.
And interestingly, the articles also note President Trump calls it the Big Beautiful Bill, or sometimes the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Yeah. So it's clearly a major focus for the administration.
Right, the Big Beautiful Bill. And Musk's comment about it, the sources quote him directly, don't they? It wasn't mild.
Not at all. The articles report he called it a disgusting abomination.
Wow. Okay, disgusting abomination. Let's just break that down simply. That means he thought it was incredibly bad.
Exactly. Like really, really bad. Something totally repellent, maybe even, morally wrong in his view. It's extremely strong language.
So right from the start, he set a really aggressive tone with that comment.
Definitely. And the sources point out that this comment, especially coming from Musk, seemed to catch people by surprise.
Why specifically from Musk? Because he worked with the administration briefly.
Precisely. Given that recent connection, even though it was short, for him to call a major Trump-backed bill a disgusting abomination, well, the articles say Republican leaders, for example, were pretty taken aback.
So it wasn't just seen as a policy disagreement. It felt bigger.
Yeah, the sources suggest it was seen as a significant political statement, maybe unexpected. It signaled this wasn't just a minor argument about details. It was something deeper, maybe more personal.
Okay, so we have the trigger Musk's comment on June 5th. But then the articles try to explain the why. Right, the reasons both sides gave for the disagreement, according to the reporting.
Exactly. They lay out the perspectives from both Trump and Musk. Let's start with President Trump's side, based on what's in your sources.
How did he react?
Well, the articles say he responded pretty quickly that same day, Thursday, June 5th. The sources place him speaking to reporters in the White House, in the Oval Office specifically.
And his reaction to Musk's comment?
The reports quote him saying he was very disappointed with Elon Musk. So he immediately framed it in personal terms, not just policy.
Very disappointed. And did he say anything else about their relationship? Because they did have one, professionally at least.
He did. The articles show he brought up their past connection directly. He's quoted saying something like, Elon and I had a great relationship.
Yeah.
But then he questioned if that would continue. The quote in the sources is, I don't know if we will anymore.
So he took Musk's criticism of the bill as a personal break, potentially. Like a betrayal.
That's certainly how it sounds from the reporting. Like the political disagreement was damaging their personal connection, in his view.
Did the articles say why Trump thought Musk was criticizing him so harshly? Did he offer a reason?
Yes, the sources mentioned Trump had a theory. He suggested, according to the articles, that maybe Musk was critical because he missed being involved with the White House.
Ah, because Musk had just left that government efficiency job the week before, right?
Exactly. The timing is key context provided in the sources. Trump implied, reportedly, that Musk was unhappy about leaving, maybe missed the influencer access, and that's why he was lashing out.
And didn't Trump use a specific phrase for that kind of thing, something the sources mentioned?
He did. The articles state Trump suggested Musk might have Trump derangement syndrome.
Okay, what does that mean, according to the sources? How did Trump use it?
Well, the sources explain that Trump tends to use that phrase for people, often critics or former allies who he thinks become, irrationally hostile towards him. The implication is it's because they're somehow negatively affected by him or miss being associated with him.
So by using that label, he was trying to say Musk's criticism wasn't really about the bill.
Sort of. According to the articles, it frames the criticism not as a genuine policy concern, but more like a symptom of some personal issue Musk had after leaving the administration. It's a way to shift focus from the substance to the motive.
Hmm. And there was another detail in the sources about Trump's comments that day. Something unusual about Musk's appearance.
Oh, yeah, that was quite specific. The articles report Trump mentioned seeing Musk on his last day at the White House with a black eye.
A black eye, really?
Yeah, and Trump reportedly said he even offered Musk makeup to cover it up.
That's a strange detail to include when talking about a budget bill disagreement.
It is. The sources just report it as something Trump said, maybe to make it more personal, add a memorable image, maybe even mock him slightly. Hard to say, but it definitely adds a weird personal touch to Trump's side of the story as reported.
Okay, so that's Trump's reaction based on the sources. Now let's flip to Elon Musk. How did he respond to Trump's disappointment and theories? The articles say he used X, his platform.
That's right. Faced with Trump saying he was disappointed and questioning their relationship, Musk's first public response on X, as reported in the articles, was, well, very brief.
What did he write?
Just
Whatever.
whatever. That's it. That's what the sources quote. Pretty dismissive, right? It suggests maybe he wasn't taking the personal stuff too seriously or wanted to pivot back to the actual issue.
Which, for him, according to the sources, was always the bill itself.
Exactly. His main stated reason for being unhappy, the articles detail, was the big, beautiful bill. Specifically, he was worried about how it would affect the government's finances.
The debt.
Yeah, the debt. He called it a massive spending bill, in quotes found in the sources. That was the core of his stated problem fiscal responsibility, or the lack of it, as he saw it.
And he used other strong words, too, right? Something about pork.
He did. The sources report him saying the bill included disgusting pork, all caps in some reports.
Okay, we talked about pork before. In government bills, the sources say that means.
It means money added for specific projects or interests that aren't really necessary for the main goal of the bill. Things often seen as wasteful, maybe just to please certain politicians or groups.
So, disgusting pork means he thought the bill was full of really bad, wasteful spending.
That's the clear implication from the sources. He found it fundamentally objectionable on those grounds.
And the sources also mentioned he pointed to a specific policy area he didn't like. Something about energy.
Yes, that's another key part of his critique reported in the articles. He highlighted that the bill apparently cuts incentives for electric vehicles, EVs, and solar energy.
Things his companies are involved in, obviously. What are incentives again?
Basically, financial help or tax breaks from the government to encourage people or companies to do something, in this case, use or develop clean energy tech.
And he compared those cuts
To how the bill treated oil and gas. The sources say Musk pointed out that the bill didn't cut subsidies government financial help for the fossil fuel industry.
and he called that.
Very unfair. That's the quote in the articles. So his criticism wasn't just general concern about debt, it was also about specific policy choices he saw as biased against clean energy.
Okay, so the first shots were fired. Musk's abomination comment, Trump's disappointment and theories. But the sources make it clear it didn't end there. It really escalated, didn't it? Especially online.
Oh, absolutely. It turned into a proper public back and forth on social media. This is where the articles show it getting really intense and personal.
How so? What did Trump say next, according to the sources? He used Truth Social.
Yeah, his platform. The articles report Trump writing that Musk was wearing thin.
Wearing thin, meaning he was getting tired of Musk, annoyed.
Pretty much, like his patience was running out with Musk's criticisms and public statements.
And Trump also doubled down on the whole leaving the administration thing.
He did. The articles report Trump wrote on Truth Social that he was the one who asked Musk to leave his government job. A clear assertion of control.
And Musk's reaction to that claim, again on X.
Swift and direct. The sources quote, Musk calling Trump's statement, "Such an obvious lie. So sad."
Wow. So a direct public accusation of lying about why he left the job.
Exactly. Not just differing opinions here, but a flat-out disagreement on a factual event played out publicly, according to the report.
Then Musk brought up his past support for Trump.
He did, raising the stakes considerably. The sources report Musk wrote something quite bold on X, along the lines of, Without me, Trump would have lost the election.
That's a huge claim, asserting he was decisive in Trump's win.
It definitely implies a massive level of influence or contribution, in Musk's view, as reported.
Did he back that up with anything, like mention money?
Yes, the articles state Musk specifically referenced the financial backing he provided to the Trump campaign.
How much are we talking about, according to the sources?
The figures cited are substantial. Around US $250 million is mentioned in one article. Another source puts that in Canadian dollars nearly $400 million, just to give a sense of the scale.
So, after claiming he gave all that money, how did he frame Trump's criticism of him?
He called Trump's reaction such ingratitude. That quote appears in the sources. It paints Trump as failing to appreciate the massive help Musk claims he provided in the past.
This is getting really personal. Did it go even further politically? Something about impeachment?
It did, according to one source. It reports that Musk actually responded yes to a post on X from someone else who was calling for President Trump to be impeached.
He agreed with a call for impeachment, publicly.
Even just replying yes, as the source states, is a very strong political statement against a sitting president, especially during a heated public feud like this. It shows how extreme the opposition got.
And there was one more reference Musk made, something potentially damaging. The sources mention Epstein.
Yes, one article notes that during this online argument, Musk made social media posts referencing Mr. Trump and Jeffrey Epstein.
Did the article say what the reference was, or provide details?
No, the article explicitly states he made the reference without giving details or evidence. It just reports that the reference occurred in his public messages during the fight.
Still, just making that link publicly is pretty inflammatory.
Extremely. It shows just how low the public fight descended, into really sensitive and potentially damaging territory, according to that source.
So it wasn't just words anymore. The sources say it started involving business. Real money.
Exactly. The disagreement quickly spilled over into threats involving Musk's companies and their financial health.
Who made the first move there? Trump.
According to the articles, yes. President Trump reportedly escalated things by threatening the government contracts held by Musk's companies.
How did he threaten them?
The sources report Trump wrote, presumably on Truth Social, that an easiest way to save money for the government would be simply to end those contracts.
And the contracts are important. Worth a lot.
Billions of dollars, the sources note. So this wasn't an idle threat. It was a public suggestion from the president to potentially pull huge amounts of government business from Musk's companies. A major financial blow.
Okay, so Trump threatens billions in contracts. How did Musk respond to that? The sources say he reacted on X again?
He did, and his reported response was very specific, framed as a direct reaction to the president's threat.
What did he say he'd do?
The sources quote him writing that his company, SpaceX, would begin decommissioning its Dragon spacecraft immediately.
Decommissioning Dragon, what are those used for again, according to the sources?
They're crucial spacecraft. The articles explain simply that they carry astronauts and supplies up to the International Space Station for NASA.
So Musk basically threatened to start grounding the spacecraft NASA relies on right after Trump threatened his contracts.
That's the reported sequence of events, a very direct and potentially very disruptive countermove targeting a critical government operation.
And wasn't there some recent history with Dragon that makes this even more pointed? Something the sources mentioned about March.
Yes, good point. The sources add important context there. They mention a situation just back in March where a Dragon spacecraft was actually key to rescuing astronauts.
Rescuing them from what?
They'd been stuck on the space station for months because of problems with a different spacecraft, the Boeing Starliner. And a SpaceX Dragon brought them home.
And the sources say Trump knew about this, was involved.
They do. They note President Trump had publicly asked Musk for help with that very situation, getting those astronauts back safely.
So Trump recently asked for help using Dragon, and now he's threatening SpaceX contracts. And Musk responds by threatening Dragon itself. That context makes the exchange seem even sharper.
Absolutely. That recent history, reported in the sources, really highlights the tension and the specific nature of Musk's counter-threat.
Beyond the contract drama, did this whole public fight affect Musk's other big company, Tesla? The sources mention the stock market?
They do. The news of this feud apparently had a very quick, very negative impact on Tesla's stock price.
How bad was it?
One source quantifies it, saying Tesla stock dropped by 14% in just a couple of hours after the disagreement became public and the threats started flying.
14%. That's a huge hit. Fast. Shows these words have real financial consequences.
Definitely. It's a clear example reported in the sources of how a public dispute involving a CEO can directly impact their company's value in the market.
And Musk also made some kind of economic prediction during all this.
He did, according to the sources. He reportedly said that President Trump's tariffs.
Those are the taxes on goods from other countries, right?
Exactly. Musk predicted those tariffs would actually cause a recession later in the year, a major economic downturn.
So adding economic forecasting to his list of criticisms against Trump's policies.
Seems like it. Positioning himself, as reported, in opposition on multiple fronts: spending, trade, and the overall economy.
Okay, to really understand all this, especially Musk's anger about the budget bill and Trump's comments about his job, the sources bring up Musk's very recent government role again. The timing seems crucial.
It really does. The articles emphasize that this whole blowup happened just 1 week after Musk finished his time as a special government employee in the Trump administration.
And his job there, the sources say, was leading that project called DOGE.
Right. DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And his whole task, according to the sources, was specifically to find and cut government waste and unnecessary spending.
So he was literally just working on the exact thing, government spending, that he's now publicly attacking in this new bill.
Precisely. His recent job was directly focused on government efficiency and reducing spending, which provides important context for his strong reaction to a bill he saw as doing the opposite.
Did his DOGE project actually achieve anything? Did the sources say he found savings?
They acknowledged that he did identify potential cuts. One source gives a figure, an estimated $170 billion in spending that his project targeted for elimination.
$170 billion. I mean, that sounds like a massive amount of money.
It does, on its own. But the articles immediately put that number into perspective against the bigger picture of government finances.
How so? Compared to the deficit.
Exactly. The deficit, the gap between what the government spends and what it takes in each year, is much, much larger than $170 billion.
And how does it compare to the bill they're fighting about, the big, beautiful bill?
That's where the comparison is really stark, according to the sources. They cite the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the CBO.
The official scorekeepers for bills, right?
Right. And the CBO estimated, as reported in the articles, that this one bill would increase the deficit by $2.4 trillion over the next 10 years.
Okay, wait. So Musk's project cut $170 billion. But this bill adds $2.4 trillion.
Over 10 years, yes. That's the projection cited in the sources. So the articles highlight that the savings from DOGE, while significant, are dwarfed by the projected increase in debt from this single piece of legislation Musk was attacking. It really frames the scale of the debate.
Let's dig into that big, beautiful bill a bit more then, since it's at the heart of this. What do the sources say is actually in it based on that CBO analysis?
Well, the CBO numbers presented in the articles give a breakdown. Over 10 years, it's projected to cut taxes by a huge amount, $3.75 trillion.
Okay, so big tax cuts. That matches the tax break bull description.
Definitely. But as we just said, the CBO also estimates it increases the overall deficit by $2.4 trillion over that same decade. So the tax cuts aren't fully paid for by spending cuts, according to the projection.
Did the CBO look at other impacts besides just money, like social effects?
Yes. The articles mention the CBO also estimated effects on health insurance coverage.
What did they find?
The projection reported in the sources was pretty striking. It could lead to 10.9 million more people being uninsured by the year 2034 compared to current law.
10.9 million more without health insurance. That's a lot. Does it say who those people are?
The articles specify that number includes people living in the country without legal status who might currently be covered by some state programs. So a significant impact on healthcare access is projected.
What about the spending side? Did the CBO say the bill cuts any spending?
It did. The articles report the CBO estimated the bill would reduce government spending by nearly $1.3 trillion over 10 years.
Okay, so let me see if I have this right from the sources and the CBO. Huge tax cuts, $3.75. Some spending cuts, $1.03, but still a big increase in the deficit, $2.04, and potentially millions losing health insurance.
That's the summary of the CBO's projections as presented in the articles, yes.
And do the sources list any specific things a bill would actually do? Policies? It passed the House already, they said.
Yes, passed the House, heading to the Senate, according to the sources. They list a few key provisions. It would make the 2017 Trump tax cuts permanent.
Okay.
It would spend more money on border security. It would add requirements for people to work in order to receive Medicaid health benefits.
Medicaid is the program for lower-income people.
That's right. And finally, confirming Musk's point, the sources state the bill would get rid of tax credits for clean energy.
So those specific policies paint a picture of the bill's priorities, beyond just the big numbers.
Exactly. Tax cuts, border security, work requirements for benefits, and ending clean energy support seem to be the key elements highlighted in the sources.
Now, going back to Musk's time in government, his DOGE project, the sources didn't just report the savings, right? They also mentioned some criticisms or different views on how effective or maybe how neutral his work was.
That's right. It wasn't presented as a simple success story in all the sources. Some articles included critical perspectives.
What kind of criticisms?
A major one, highlighted in the sources, was the concern that Musk's work on government efficiency might have actually ended up benefiting his own companies.
How? The conflict of interest.
Potentially. The articles mention a specific report titled Corruption in Plain Sight that explored this idea.
Corruption in plain sight. What did that report suggest, according to the articles?
It raised the possibility, based on its findings as reported, that a number of government investigations into Musk's own companies, maybe as many as 32, could have been stalled, stopped, or just sort of vanished while he was working inside the government on the DOGE project.
32 investigations potentially disappeared. That sounds serious. How could that happen?
Well, the sources explain the mechanism critics point to. They suggest that some of the government agencies responsible for those kinds of investigations were themselves impacted by the DOGE efficiency drive.
Impacted how? Like budget cuts.
Exactly. The sources say some relevant agencies were defunded, got less money, or had investigators fired or reassigned as part of Musk's efforts to streamline government.
Did the articles give any specific examples of agencies that were investigating Musk and then got cut back?
They do provide a couple of examples to illustrate the critics' point.
Right.
One is the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, or OFCCP.
Well, they do.
They check if companies with government contracts are treating their workers fairly following equal opportunity laws. The sources say the OFCCP was auditing Tesla.
Musk's car company.
Right, auditing Tesla. But then, the source reports, the OFCCP was gutted, meaning severely weakened sometime after the Trump administration began, around the time Musk was involved.
Okay, that's one example. Was there another?
Yes, the sources also mention USAU, the U.S. Agency for International Development.
What were they looking into?
According to the articles, USA was investigating Musk's Starlink satellite internet company regarding its service in Ukraine.
And what happened to USAID?
The sources state that Musk's DOGE project ultimately recommended eliminating that agency entirely.
So, the critics cited in the sources see a pattern. Agencies investigating Musk's companies were weakened or eliminated during his time leading the government efficiency project.
That's the core of the critical perspective presented, that his actions, intended or not, might have reduced oversight of his own businesses.
And the sources quote someone summing up this view.
Yes, they quote Margaret Poydock, identified as being with a group focused on inequality issues. Her reported quote sums it up. Musk's legacy in government has benefited him largely.
So that quote captures the essence of the criticism found in the sources that his government work ended up helping his private businesses.
That's the takeaway from that particular perspective detailed in the articles.
Okay, so let's try to pull all these different threads together now. We've gone through the start and the fight, the personal attacks, the money threats, the details on the bill, Musk's government job, the criticisms. What are the main things we learned from looking closely at these sources you shared?
Well, first, I think we saw really clearly how a disagreement about policy, that specific budget bill, could just ignite into a very public, very intense, and very personal fight.
Yeah, it escalated incredibly quickly from arguing about spending to, insults and accusations. It shows how volatile things can get between powerful people.
And it wasn't just a quiet disagreement. The sources really highlight how much of it played out on social media with really strong language, claims about past support, calling each other liars. It became very theatrical, almost.
Less about the bill itself eventually and more about their personal history and feelings, it seems.
And crucially, the sources show it wasn't just talk. It moved into the realm of real consequences, business, money.
Right. The threat to the government contracts, which the sources said were worth billions.
And Musk's counter threat about the Dragon spacecraft.
Plus, the immediate hit to Tesla's stock price.
Yeah.
The articles make it clear these fights can have tangible financial impacts.
Definitely. And finally, we saw how Musk's recent government job trying to cut spending, was tangled up in all this, both as context for his anger about the bill and as something critics pointed to suggesting potential conflicts of interest.
So his time in government wasn't just a footnote. It was central to the whole situation described in the sources, both for him and for his critics.
Exactly. It adds a whole layer of complexity to the story presented in the articles, the intersection of government service, personal business, and public perception.
And thinking about why this deep dive matters for you, the listener, I guess it's a really clear case study based on these sources of how these worlds collide.
Yeah, how disagreements over big government decisions like this bill don't happen in a vacuum. They can become incredibly personal, very public battles.
And it shows how government actions, business interests, billions of dollars, it's all connected according to the reporting we've looked at. Seeing the details, like the CBO numbers or the agency examples,
Yeah.
helps trace those connections.
Absolutely. The articles, taken together, really paint a picture of a messy public brawl,
Started with the bill.
but quickly brought in history, insults, business threats, everything but the kitchen sink almost.
It definitely makes you think about how figures like these use platforms like X and Truth Social for these arguments, right out in the open.
For sure. And just how tangled up money and political power really are, as illustrated in these specific events reported in the sources.
So as we wrap up, maybe something to think about further based on everything we've unpacked from the sources.
Yeah, here's a final thought. We saw strong disagreements in the articles, not just between Trump and Musk personally, but about the substance of that big, beautiful bill. Remember the CBO numbers?
The $2.4 trillion deficit increase, the 10.9 million potentially uninsured, the specific tax and spending changes.
Exactly. So beyond the drama and the personalities, what do those details, the specific numbers and policy points reported in the sources, tell us about the actual underlying challenges the government is grappling with? Things like debt, healthcare, energy policy. Maybe that's worth considering, separate from the feud itself.
That's a great point, focusing on the policy substance behind the headlines. Thank you for sharing these sources and joining us for this deep dive into this whole Trump-Musk situation.
Hope unpacking the details from the articles helped give you a clearer, deeper perspective on it all.
So don't forget to subscribe to Daily Easy English Talk so you don't miss our next show.
Yeah, please do, and share it with your friends if you found it helpful.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye-bye.